just before we kick off, can I just see a show of hands? In the last month, have you had a deal where there's been ATO arrears that's maybe giving you a bit of a headache? Just put your hand up. Yeah, so we've seen a few. What about the last 6 months? Yeah, okay. All right, so there is an issue there. All right, we're going to start with Michael. Michael, the ATO has been stepping up since COVID. Yep. What is the ATO's approach? What are the tools that they've been bringing in? What are some of the key stats? I mean, is it 15 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion in small business? So what are they doing, and what are some of the stats, and what are some of the things that small businesses are suddenly finding themselves dealing with?
Yeah, look, Nick, and thanks everyone for coming today and for giving your time. I know everybody's busy. Look, as we mentioned, we've been doing this for over 10 years. This is the toughest I've seen the ATO in that time. We all know what happened during COVID. They essentially said to businesses, don't worry about the debt you have, and also keep lodging, but don't worry about paying the debt that you're accruing in doing this. And, it's a little bit of a deja vu from the GFC. And so what that has meant is that I think in terms of the numbers, which kind of sort of explain where we're at, if you look at, and these are just the published numbers from the ATO, prior to COVID, 30 June 2019, it was $26.2 billion in undisputed tax debt. The latest published figures from last year are 50. So that's an 89% increase in a 4-year period. We think it's higher than that because a lot of the businesses we are seeing have got a lot of unlodged debt. So I've heard 60 billion, potentially even $70 billion in debt. And I think, one of the things, if there's nothing else to take away from today, and I'll explain a little bit more about why, but the debts are not only, there's a lot more taxpayers, but the size of the debts are increasing. In the past, we've been able to work with businesses and get their debts out through cash flow. A lot of businesses can't do that at the moment. So the people in this room are part of the solution for that. And I think, that's a market that needs funding. In terms of what the ATO are doing, credit reporting is a big one. Who's seen a client recently that's been reported to the credit reporting bureaus? Yeah, they've done 30,000 of those this financial year so far. DPNs, again, who's had a director that's had a DPN? And I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. I don't need to explain.
Maybe just give the nutshell, the one.
Credit reporting is...
Well, the DPN, sorry.
Yeah, direct penalty notice. Basically, if you're a director of a company, you set up a corporate structure so that you sit behind it and you're not personally liable. It doesn't work with tax if you have unpaid GST, pay-as-you-go withholding or superannuation. When you don't pay it, you become personally liable. People think it's the notice that makes you liable. That's just a precondition for the ATO actually suing on it. But, what you find is that if you've got those debts, the ATO issuing these like confetti, there was 20,000 of these issued already this year, and they issued a bunch. That was their initial thing. And what the ATO say they do it is to get directors to engage. But what it does mean is if you're a director, and there's two types, and I won't go too much into the detail, there's a lockdown one and a non-lockdown one. The non-lockdown one allows a director to go and see Sule or one of his colleagues and put the company under within 21 days, and they avoid the personal liability. But if you're a business owner, and it's also 21 days from the day of the letter, you might not see it for a week or so, and you've got 14 days to decide whether you want to either put your house on the line, because a lot of people aren't structured in that way, or put your business under. It's tough. It puts a lot of pressure on you. So the only way to avoid getting one of these, people often say, what can we do to stop it? You've got to get into an active payment plan with the ATO. The ATO, for all of these things, the thing that stops it is what they call active engagement. And people used to think that was, I'm talking to the ATO, I'm paying money, and I had a client just yesterday exactly that, doing all of that. And they've got a credit reporting and a direct penalty notice on its way. So it doesn't stop it.
And just finally, before I sort of move on to Shannon, this number of 30 billion, 50 billion, whatever it is, I sat down there, with a calculator or pen and paper and crossing out zeros to try and work out what the average must be. It must be really high. Yeah. Like we're not talking about 100,000. Some of these debts are I've personally seen 5 million, 6 million.
Yeah,
so
yeah, look, it's interesting because that's the thing, as I mentioned before, about the size of the debt. And look, I don't have the stats on what the average is, and I'm not even sure they're available. But what I do know is our client base hasn't changed much over the last 5 years. The average debt we are seeing has almost doubled. Our average debt, we do everything from people with 100K to, I've got a guy I'm dealing with at the moment with 8.5 million. But our average debt, because 2/3 of that debt is small business, by the way, it's not top end of town. So that's the 30 billion, is the small business component. But our average debt was around that sort of $500,000, $400,000 to $500,000. Our average debt's now around about 900, but we're seeing regularly, Zelly and I spoke to one last night, 1.7 million. That's not a small debt for us at the moment. They're big numbers.
I mean, what are some of the negotiation strategies that work? And I guess in telling us that, just so that brokers can identify, what is a salvageable situation.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, look, the key is probably two things. Early engagement. The sooner you get in with the ATO, the better outcome you get. If you leave it till there's a statutory demand or you wind up, then it's very difficult to do anything about that. But we still do that, but I guess the outcome we get isn't quite as good. The other thing is you've got to engage with the ATO properly. The ATO have got quite detailed legal practice statements. And this is why we get about 35% of our work from accountants, because we've actually read them. A lot of people haven't read them, they don't read it, and they're getting a lot of requests back from the ATO at the moment saying, we want this information. It's been in the legal practice statements forever, but the ATO are now enforcing them strictly because they're wanting to show not only that a business can afford to pay the money back, but they're viable, and that's become a big issue with the ATO at the moment. So we're doing a lot of work around that, but every day we're getting businesses that are somewhere along that recovery space with the ATO, getting them into long-term payment arrangements. We're also working with brokers, and I'll explain a little bit about that if we need to bring finance in. But look, I'll give you an example. We had one just recently, and it was actually brought to us by a broker. There was already funding in place, but they've been reported to the Credit Reporting Bureau. It was a construction company in Western Sydney, $1.4 million debt. They'd had the reporting done, and they'd come up because they were looking to do some more lending. The funder, it had massive consequences because all the alerts went out to both the funders and also to all their suppliers. Suppliers put them on COD straight away. The funder said, we're going to pull your facility, forget about the new lending. We were able to go in, and we did this in about 2.5 weeks. We provided a comfort letter they gave to the funder and to their suppliers. They continued to support the business. We got the minimum payment plan. We got the credit listing removed permanently, and that's one of the things that is a little bit different to the ATO listings. They go off permanently, so you can't do anything about the alerts that go out. But we knocked about 300 grand off the debt, and then they moved on. So that's kind of an example where we can do it. What we're doing with a lot of brokers too is where they are trying to do a deal. And imagine if you're partway through trying to place some funding, probably not with Nick and Hermes, because again, we work with them because they're very comfortable in this space. But a lot of lenders, if one of these things happen, and the big thing that can potentially happen is either they get the credit listing or there's a statutory demand that's issued and it blows the deal out of the water. So what we're doing is that we're working with the brokers and with the ATO and bringing them into the transaction and saying to the ATO, we know you want to get paid. There's an outcome here to get you paid in full, but we need you to not do anything for 3 months, whatever the period is that we need to get the funding through. Then we make sure that it doesn't kill the deal. While we're doing that, we go and clean up the interest and penalties. And that's another thing too. Sule and I were talking about it earlier. He was saying, is that making a difference? And it is, because it's 11 just came down. It's now 11.34% calculated daily. We had one just last week. 70% of the debt was interest. They still did the funding, and what it meant was that they were able to borrow more. They had extra working capital, but that made a massive difference to the cash flow in the business. So there's solutions out there, and there's pretty much always a solution. About 3% of our clients we can't fix, and that's why we would then say, look, we suggest you go and see somebody like Sule.
I'm just interested about the actual ATO's engagement and timeliness on that. We've seen a lot of clients that they just won't respond to.
It's all about, for us anyway, it's a bit of squeaky wheel. We just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And, particularly if there's a transaction that's in place and we've got a deadline, we tell the ATO that and we get them to work with us to that deadline.